So we're going to go ahead and start the next section for today. This is going to be a quick review on elements of an emergency plan, or emergency plans in review. This is actually taken from a recorded webinar we did with Bert Altman for the 2012 version of this program. So you're going to see a lot of that same information if you happen to watch that as part of the pre-homework for this workshop. This is basically going to go over all of the elements of what should be found within an emergency plan. We've covered most of this in the program, but I wanted to give a chance to just discuss everything, go over it, and I'm also going to put up a resource sheet in the Google group for everyone to see, like a basic outline. So again, this will kind of help you make sure that you have all the bits of the emergency plan that you might need. These are common portions of an emergency plan. Sometimes you'll see people kind of mix portions together or have sections kind of mashed together, but again, you'll see all these elements kind of played out within an emergency plan. This is basically everything that you'll see within an emergency plan. There are quite a few sections, as you can tell. You'll see up to 14 sections within emergency plans, sometimes smaller, sometimes larger, just really depends within the plan itself. Again, I'll put an outline on the Google group so you guys can follow along, so don't feel like you have to write down all 14 subjects right now, but I wanted to give an idea of the scope of what should be included within the plan itself. One of the first things that you'll see within an emergency plan is the introduction or instructions, essentially your policy statement. This is going to set the stage. Oftentimes you'll also see this called an executive summary. This is pretty much the first page of your plan. This will oftentimes is the one part of the plan that board members or other staff will really read thoroughly. So it's always good to kind of include all the information that's covered in the plan in it. Especially when it comes to board members, sometimes they like to read the executive summaries, and that's about it. So it's good to really include in there what's going to be covered in the plan and what was involved in the creation. It gives you kind of your snapshot of what happened. One of the next sections you'll oftentimes see in the plan is a thing called a delegation of authority. The delegation of authority is essentially the thing that designates responsibility for the plan. It'll include a statement saying, this is why we did the plan, this is who's in charge of the plan, and really give you an idea of who is in charge of the planning process for emergency plan. It's also really important within the delegation of authority to include something about how this is a team approach and how a team of people made up this plan. It's good to have it in there. Oftentimes when I started doing these projects, you would often see like one person on the staff write the entire emergency plan, and then they would put it on the shelf and leave it there. That's not a good plan. That's not helpful. It has to be a team approach. You need everyone involved. The delegation of authority is going to be the part of the document that really talks about this is how we made this plan, this is who was involved, all that kind of guts information, which is important. Another section you oftentimes see in the plan is a thing called the emergency teams. Again, this is going to give your staff a layout of who actually created the plan. It's important to include who was involved in it. It'll also often do the team responsible. It'll also include the team responsible for preparedness. The emergency teams portion of the plan is going to give you an idea of, okay, this was a team effort. Okay, these are the teams involved. It will also include maybe your training schedule or who attended the disaster training and workshops. So it gives a little bit of institutional history of what happened with the creation of the plan, and it's good to include that in there. Another section you'll oftentimes see within a plan is an emergency contact list or a phone tree. This is pretty dang important. I would say you need to see this in pretty much every plan you come across. You should have an emergency contact list. You should have at least 2 to 3 numbers per person. Oftentimes cell phones go out, so it's always good to have more than one number for a person. Another thing I would often recommend to people too is you might want to include the titles of the people on the plan, just not their names. I've gone through some emergency plans before and they'll just have Bob Smith, Tina Jones, and there's no like this person is the head librarian, this person is the assistant librarian. You want to include the titles on the page because if you don't and you have staff turnover, it's nice to know who was included on the team and who was there. You want to have an actual formalized list to include the types of hazards that will actually occur at your facility. Now, again, this can sound a little ridiculous because it seems like everyone knows, hey, we know exactly what the threats are that are going to attack our facility, but it's always good to have an actual formalized list somewhere so that future people will know what might happen at your facility or your institution. Next, and this is just a quick list of just commonly done hazards that you'll see at facilities. We have fire listed, we have flooding and water damage, medical emergency, power failure, pest and mold breaks are often included in this list of hazards, bomb threats, severe storms, hurricanes, and the actually very dreaded active shooter workplace violence. All of these should be included within a list just so you know that it's been acknowledged by everyone. Another important thing you might see included in lists are evacuation guidelines. These will actually included in the list and will be worked on with first responders. It's always really good to, this is another good little intro to getting first responders involved in your institution. You can approach them and say, hey, we don't have good evacuation guidelines within our facility. Can you please help us develop these? With that, you will have their involvement and you can include them within your emergency plans, which is useful for everyone to have. Action plan for different identified hazards that can happen. Again, very useful thing. We worked on action plans as part of the threats and priorities. For workshop 2, that was actually the activity we did. It's always good to have a couple of these written out. The best example of action plans I always think of is when you go into a Walmart. There's usually a color-coded flip chart up at the front that'll show you little action plans that you can use. You don't need to include action plans for every type of threat that you have, but you can include it for some of the major ones if you find that it would be useful for your institution. And again, this is just a quick sample of an action plan. Couple quick steps. If you happen to notice flooding or water damage, this is what you would do in that kind of a situation. Priority lists, also an important part, covered in Module 1 of this workshop series. You'll want to include what are your most valued objects, what are the core collection materials, and then lesser priority materials. Again, the theory in this is that if you get hit by a bus tomorrow and someone takes over your position, they will have all this information. You might have it in your head, you might know what the most precious thing is in your collection, but others might not, so it's always good to have it written down somewhere. It's good to have communication information written within your plan, how people are going to communicate with each other. That's really important. You'll also want to know who you're communicating with and how you will keep staff informed of what's going on. Again, some of this stuff is stuff you just might know. Well, yeah, we just use these phone lines and we just call everyone. But having it formally written in a document is incredibly important. Documentation is also essential. Oftentimes in plans, it's a good idea to have how you're going to document what's going to happen, to have samples, maybe samples that are completed in there so people know how information needs to be filled out. Documentation will help you with future fundraising and media coverage because you'll have a written history of what happens. It assists with post-disaster analysis. That is huge. If you have this nice written record after a disaster, you'll be able to sit there and go through and figure out where did things go well, where did things go wrong. It's also going to help you keep track of staffing needs and staffing time, which is important in certain grant-funded or if you're trying to get money back from your insurance company. This comes actually from Module 2, the collections and salvage procedures. These are also really good to have within your plan. Again, you don't need to get too, you can include procedures and everything you would follow. It's also just really good to acknowledge the fact that yes, we have collection salvage procedures that we follow. This is who we contact. This is how you would go about some kind of initial stages of salvage and recovery. All these little items should be included within the plan itself. This is just a quick sample of what you might see, specific steps. You know, really this plan, if everyone knows the conversation, the difference between plans, procedures, and policies, you're getting into the procedural aspect, you're getting into the nitty-gritty, but I think it's important to include certain elements within your plan. Even if it's an appendix towards the back, it's a good thing to have. Supply lists. Again, another good appendix item. Go ahead and have a list of supplies that you're going to include in your plan. Include where you're going to get those supplies from. That's always important. Have a list of suppliers and on-hand supplies somewhere within your plan. Again, you might also want to include within your plan where a secure storage location is. You want to establish and maintain clear lines of communication with contractors. And you want to continue to monitor the need for supplies. You know, we were just talking about this during lunch. This is the time of the year when usually it's a good idea to look at your supplies. We're at the beginning of hurricane season, and oftentimes I know at home this is definitely true. My batteries get rated out of my hurricane kit pretty much every year because usually around December we're digging for A's and double D's and everything. So now's a good time to look through your kit, make sure things are still good, and have an idea of what you have. And while you're doing that, you can go ahead and update what's listed in your plan as well. You should have a list of outside suppliers. We talked about this in one of the previous workshops a little bit about how you will have on-hand supplies, but those on-hand supplies will quickly become depleted. So it's a good idea to have contractors to talk to. This can be even the local Home Depot or Lowe's or salvage companies. Any of those are useful to have, and it's good to, again, to actually list them within the plan itself. Training. We talked about this a little bit earlier today. Within the plan itself, you're going to want to make sure that you talk about training, how you train, how often you train. You want to provide guidance and support within the document. You want to make sure you kind of let people know who you train. It's good to conduct drills, as Kate discussed earlier, but it's also good to identify within your staff who is going to participate in those drills, because that changes. We have staff turnover. You might have a new set of interns, any of those things. So it's a good idea within the plan itself to identify who is trained and who is not trained. And another good thing about training is that it will help cultivate teamwork. You want to involve everyone in the training, not just the collection staff, but everyone. And everyone's going to need practice with basic object handling, salvage techniques. It's a good refresher for everyone to have. One of the last items you'll see within a plan is an annual review. It's good to have a date written somewhere in the plan to say, hopefully before hurricane season. So in January of every year, we're going to review the plan, look at it, and make sure everything's good. Also include a training cycle within the plan. Again, this might be something that you already do and is just kind of part of your annual calendar within your museum, but it's always a good idea to have it written down somewhere so that future people can reference it and have proof that you underwent the training itself. So that's just a quick review of what can be found in an emergency plan. Again, I have a nice outline that I'm going to post up in Google Docs for people to refer to that kind of is an outline based on this presentation. So if anyone has any, wants to review it or want a copy of it, they're more than welcome to take that at any time. I'll probably be posting that on Monday.